Thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. I wanted to ask first, you've now been in this position, just over 100 days. How has the experience been so far in Columbus, and how does it feel to be a Buckeye?
Yeah. Well, really, it's a dream come true, I think. And anybody who's worked in college athletics for as long as I have and has family ties, which we can talk about that as well. Just the Ohio State program means so much to so many people, and it's really a standard bearer in college athletics. And so, when your name is associated with this university in any way, shape, or form, you really kind of have to pinch yourself. And so sometimes I walk around, sometimes I put on a shirt and I see Ohio State. Sometimes, traveling with our football team on our two road games, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm with Ohio State. And so I think just the magnitude of that, it's continuing to sink in. But with the family ties that we have, with me being a student of college athletics, I love this profession, understanding the magnitude of it. Getting here in March and overlapping with Gene Smith for 4 months was truly a gift and a benefit that I'll have the rest of my career. And then taking over on July 1st, it's just been awesome to get to know the people and the place, and understanding the power of Ohio State is something I'm still learning. It's big, it's massive. The brand power is something that no other program has. So just continuing to soak it all in as a Buckeye here in day 109, if we're counting as we're taping this.
That's great. I know people keep asking you if this job is what you expected it to be, but no matter how you put it, it's a huge responsibility. What do you think is the biggest part of this so far that maybe you weren't expecting?
Well, it's Ohio State, and it's big, it's massive. I just talked about all that, right? And so the question I get most often is, what has surprised you the most, which is kind of what your question is. And my answer is simply this. I'm surprised that we're a small town in a big city. You think about the size of Columbus, you think about the state of Ohio, you think about how big Ohio State is as an institution. There's 28,000 employees at the Wexner Medical Center. We have 600 employees just in athletics and business advancement. We have 1,100 athletes. So that's a big place. It's a big ecosystem, but I'm surprised that relationships still matter. And maybe I should have anticipated that. Maybe the Midwest roots and the Midwest values, that I possess, maybe I should have understood that. But I thought, because it's so big, you look at it from the outside, because we're the state capital, because, again, Columbus is booming, we're over 2 million people as a city, I didn't really think that was possible, that you could have these one-on-one interpersonal relationships where the people still matter. So that's been really cool to see that part of it. And then as I'm starting to, be in season with football or any of our sports and going to national meetings and being around colleagues, you walk in with Ohio State on your lapel and it means something different. It just does. It's hard to describe, but it just means something. And so, we have a responsibility, right, to lead the right way. And so those are the things that I've been really, really fascinated by and maybe surprised, is that the small town in a big city, I didn't really anticipate that.
I'm curious, what are some things maybe in hindsight that you wish you could have done differently now looking back at your first 100 days?
There's just not enough time,
Yeah.
Noah. I mean, meeting you, right? We met a little while ago, and just, again, meeting so many different people. And, one of the things that, and I felt this at my last stop at Texas A&M, because we're dealing with so much legislative and governance and collegiate model. And I mean, I was on, yesterday I had 2 meetings on the collegiate model. Today I had 3 meetings on the collegiate model. And so the point is, we're not spending enough time with our athletes. And so even in the first 109 days, I've tried to be everywhere. Last night we had dinner with the women's hockey team celebrating their national championship. But Friday night, I couldn't be at their banner unveiling at the ice rink because I was with football. So trying to get around to every single sport, to every practice, walking over at the Nest, walking over at the Shoemaker, walking through the Woody Hayes complex, going to different venues, there's simply not enough time. And so building those relationships, and that's the one thing I really learned by observing Gene, is people felt like he was everywhere. And so as we get ramped up here, because we're dealing with all these changes and we're trying to model this out, I feel like I haven't been everywhere. I think I have in some ways, but in a lot of ways, I'm still just trying to meet people. And so those are the things that I'll continue to focus on is, being visible, I think I have a very accessible personality, but you can only be one place at a time. And so just understanding that dynamic will continue to push and continue to meet all of our athletes and all of our staff and all of our coaches. And it's just a massive ecosystem.
Now, a lot of athletic directors shy away from being engaged with the media, but you really seem to embrace it. What is your philosophy like and your relationship like with the media?
Yeah, I think our coaches and athletes should really be front and center. I mean, they're really the face of the program. But I think somebody has to talk about overall vision. Somebody has to believe in every single sport. Our field hockey coach, Jared Martin, he's dialed into field hockey. Now, he cares about football. Everybody does. But he's focused on his team. To me, I've got to be really the chief sort of cheerleader, and I've got to be the chief vision caster. And so I think people need to hear from who's leading the department. It doesn't mean we have to be front and center. It doesn't mean that we're the one and only. It means that I think we can create confidence by being involved with the media, creating relationships. You and I have talked a lot about this. I want to be very transparent and very honest with our media and with our constituents, and I think Ohio State expects that. I think our fan base, our family, Buckeye Nation, I think expects you to be honest and hit it head on, and so that's kind of always been my approach. And I think having these relationships, and especially student media members, you're learning, and so can we help in some way? Jerry Emig in our communications office, I think he does a great job of mentoring, younger media members. And so, I think that's a responsibility that we have too. We have to remember this is education. Even though we want to win games and, there's big money and all these things that happen, we are still in the education business. And so I think that relationship and that mentality, I think, is something that I just believe in, having positive, relationships with all media members.
Now, I want to jump into football a little bit. This past weekend, describe for me what you felt when you were watching the last minute of this game unfold. What were you thinking? What went through your head? And then when the clock hit 0, what was your emotion like?
So Noah, we have a 48-hour rule. Actually, it's 24 hours, but because we had a bye week, it was 48 hours. So you're trying to make me go back over those 48 hours. I'm sitting there, great atmosphere, tremendous fan experience. If you're just watching that game as a neutral observer, you're watching two heavyweight teams, just go at it and make play for play. And, I felt if we could ever get up 2 scores in that game, I thought we could have put them away, and it was a dogfight, right? It was back and forth. You always want to give your team a chance, right? And you always want to put yourself in position. And I thought, okay, after they scored the go-ahead touchdown, we're only down 1. We got plenty of time. We have a timeout. And so I thought, okay, we're going to get in position. And we were close, right, to getting in position. So my thought immediately turns to, okay, how the game was officiated at the end. Was there anything mechanically that we need to provide feedback on? My focus goes to our players and what they're feeling. And then my focus goes to supporting Coach Day. And so all those emotions, yeah, you're upset, right, that you lost the game, but I can't act emotionally. I have to be supportive. I've got to be positive. I've got to uplift. And so all of those emotions are going through your mind. I think it's easy to get really, really high, and it's easy to get really, really low. And my job is never the extreme. I can't get too high, and I can't get too low. So it's not as bad as we think it is. It's probably never as good as we think it is, right? So what's sort of the approach where we can be supportive in the moment? And so all those things are going through my head. And then the competitive piece is you're just distraught, for the players. And how much our fans pour into it, how much they work. And then you got to look big picture. So there's probably 100 different emotions going through my head in the last minute of that game. But it included a lot of just, I think, perspective and leadership that, hey, now we have to lead. Now we have to regroup. Now we have to uplift we have to pick Will Howard off the field, right, and help him get back on track. And then I saw a bunch of players the last couple of days, and they're positive and they're ready to move forward. So it's a lot of those things that go in, to the emotion of all of this.
And you mentioned it's important to stay level-headed, stay neutral, but fans obviously are not usually like that. If you looked honestly on social media after the game, the first and most prevalent thing that was going on was Ryan Day's record against top 5 teams being 2-6, and that he's on the hot seat. Those were the two biggest things on social media. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, one, I don't have any mentions turned on my social media, so I don't even, if they're talking to me, I don't even see it anyway. Here's what I said when I had my opening statement back in January when I first got announced is Ohio State Athletics, we are a public trust of the state of Ohio, meaning people feel like they have ownership, in the program, in the university, and that's okay. We embrace that. We embrace those high expectations. So I mentioned that I know people care. Now we need to channel that, right? If it gets extreme, and there's things that Coach Day and his family have had to endure that no one should have to endure, even after Saturday night's game. So that, to me, that part's unacceptable. We cannot have people, act that way. But it's okay to point out facts. It's okay to point out certain things. We all understand that. We're all a product of competition, and we all get evaluated, right? There's a scoreboard for a reason. We keep score. And so, look, my job is to figure out with Coach Day, hey, are there any barriers? Hey, what are you analyzing as we go through this? What are you looking at in terms of, watching the film or watching the schematics or watching the game plan or, what led up to, that particular game or that particular moment? My job is to just support him, help him through that, help him analyze, right, any deficiencies that might be there. But we got to remember, we lost to the number 3 team on the road by 1 point and had the ball, had a chance to win, right? And so I look at big picture also in terms of how the program operates on a day-to-day basis. And Coach Day is the most consistent football coach and leader that I've been around in my career. And I've been around some great coaches, and he has a level-headed perspective. He works his tail off. He's a super, super innovator in terms of the modern day game. We've adapted to this whole new model. So you've got to look at the big picture, and then you sit down and say, okay, what do we need to do to fix that record that you mentioned, right? What do we need to do to manage through this and support our players and get back on track? But we got to remember, we are the standard bearer because of what's come before us, and we get that. And so how do we live up to that? Those are the things that we constantly talk about.
Now, away from coaching on the field, Ryan Day recruits like a machine. That's what he does. There's no denying it. He's relentless. How important do you think recruiting is to the success of a head coach?
Well, I like to say recruiting is like brushing your teeth. If you stop brushing your teeth, what happens? You get ugly. If you stop recruiting, you can get ugly pretty fast. And so recruiting is nonstop. This week, because it's a bye week, our coaches are out. They're going to see games on Friday night. And so Ohio State's always going to be able to recruit the best of the best. And that's what's really neat about this program is we can always go after the top, players in the country. And we can also go after the top character. We don't have to take shortcuts. And I've been really impressed with the character of our team as much as their talent. And so those two things, I think, go hand in hand. But it comes down to evaluation. It comes down to character evaluation. It comes down to who is surrounding all of these young men, who's in their family, who's in their network, because that impacts what happens once they step foot on campus. So we do all of that at a really high level here, and the Ohio State brand is nationwide, and we get to capitalize on that. We sell more merchandise than anybody. We have more fans than anybody in the country. That leads over to recruiting, and so, again, we get to capitalize on that, and that's where I think Coach Day, and if you look at the staff, it's not only Coach Day, but we have elite recruiters on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. And now that there's legislation where others can coach that weren't allowed to before, then essentially everybody's a talent evaluator now, and I think we have a really good system. So recruiting really is the number one thing in terms of, mapping out, the future of the program.
Now, this team and this roster is very top-heavy with seniors. How do you manage the momentum, knowing what the money took to bring some players here but then also maintaining players like Jeremiah Smith or Julian Sayin or those types of guys.
Yeah, again, that's where relationships matter, recruiting matters. That's where having a great staff, having a great culture. One of the things that I've been really impressed with since I got to know Coach Day, and I think what he's really, really honed in on, and I think the teams that are going to succeed at the highest level in this new era, they're going to have culture, they're going to have chemistry, they're going to have leadership. Does that mean everyone will stay? Not necessarily, right? There was transfers that left the program for a variety of reasons. In this era, you're going to have that. But how do you make sure your nucleus, how do you make sure the core folks stay involved? And that goes down to the leadership piece, that goes down to the culture. And so knowing that, yeah, there's a lot of seniors, there's a game plan. You know, we've already, right now, I think the number one class in the country, I haven't seen the rankings lately. Those things kind of fade once the season starts, but going into the season, we had the number one ranked recruiting class. We will always go after key transfers, not a massive transfers, because I think Coach Day has a really good philosophy on that, but who are the key replacements? We're losing this position. We're losing two guys at this position. Do you need to go out and get a transfer? They're already mapping all of those things out, and so you got to be organized. You got to be proactive. We know that, you know, revenue share allocations are coming. I'm sure we'll get into that. We know NIL is part of the ecosystem. So, and we're at the, you know, top of the game in terms of those elements, and so we'll continue to thrive, I believe, in this new era.
And the men's basketball program here is extremely important to everyone. In the last few years, they've underperformed, and they haven't met those expectations. With that said, Jake Diebler is coming in for his first full season. What are the expectations for the program this year, and then also looking ahead to the following years?
Yeah, you know, I think here at Ohio State, we want to win. We want to win in everything, right? Whether it's pistol, we won 4 national championships in a row, or women's ice hockey's won 2 out of the last 3. And so, you know, expectations, I think, for any sport are to compete. But basketball has a really unique history, and we've shown in sort of a recent modern era that we can get to the Final Four, and we can be right there on the dance floor. Under Thad Matta, we were right there, right? And so we know we have the ingredients. We know every time that I turned around during our coaching search, people kept asking, how come Ohio State hasn't got back to where Thad Matta had it? And I don't know all the answers other than let's get the right people. And so when we did the coaching search, that led us to Jake. I saw Jake up close and personal. I didn't know Jake Diebler at all going into my tenure here at Ohio State. And when Gene made the change, he told me he was going to make Jake the interim coach. You're going to love Jake, his energy. And sure enough, when I met him on March 3rd, I said, okay, I'm going to keep my eye on this, but we're also going to do a national search. And, you know, really the expectations is that we're in the hunt. We're in the hunt for a Big Ten championship. We're in the hunt to make a long run in the NCAA tournament. Is that going to be easy? No. But our schedule, our preseason schedule, we're playing Texas. We're playing Texas A&M, Auburn, Kentucky, Pitt. Those kind of games, and then you go into the Big Ten play, those kind of games will prepare you for a postseason run. And the teams that have guard play usually do well in March, and we have a deep backcourt. And so I think our team is built for excitement, for fun, for high energy, for up-tempo. That kind of fits Jake's mentality. So I think our fans are in for a treat in the first year. How many games we're going to win? Nobody knows. Do I think we'll be really, really competitive and in the conversation? Absolutely. And Jake feels the same way.
And then you mentioned it, but Jake was really the first time you were involved in a hiring here. You worked alongside Gene, but what was that process like for you to be, you know, in the hiring process for the first time at Ohio State?
Yeah. You know, Gene and I had met the end of January. We were at a national conference, and I'd asked him, I said, hey, Gene, is there any sports on the radar for the spring that you might be thinking about? You know, any sort of coaching decisions? And he said he was just worried about basketball, that he just felt that we just were not making the right kind of progress. And so, right, light bulb goes off. You start to do a little research. I was not here in Ohio. I was still back in Texas. And he called me, I don't know, the 12th or 13th of February and just kind of laid out, hey, look, I think this might be happening. And I said, okay, so much for my month-long sabbatical during my transition. But honestly, not being here for 3 weeks or so, it allowed me to totally do research. We didn't have to be in a rush. We had plenty of time to conduct a search once I did get on the ground. And so I talked to at least 20 players, former players, that maybe I wouldn't have spoken to them at that time period anyway. Maybe I would have met them later. Maybe I would have met them when I started after July the 1st, right? But I was able to speak to former players. I was able to learn our hiring processes. I was able to learn how do we work contracts? What does HR look like? What's the board of trustee layer in terms of approving contracts and the compensation committee? I was able to learn all of that really just right from the beginning. And I think that set me up for understanding, a lot of the dynamics here in terms of how things work. So that piece, the logistical piece, was awesome. But it also helped validate in the marketplace what people think of Ohio State athletics. Basketball obviously was the search, but we kept hearing from so many people that Ohio State has this elevated brand, this elevated stature in college athletics. And so you kind of hear that, you understand that. When I got the job, right, I understood that. But to hear that validated through kind of the marketplace was really, really fascinating to kind of hear that and see that firsthand. And then just getting to know Jake and getting to understand what he was built for, how he thought about this job. Really, it's a dream job being an Ohio guy. He always said he wasn't good enough to play here. His brother was, but he wasn't. And so this was a dream job being an Ohio guy. And so that really made an impact on me to say, look, we got somebody who cares. And we have somebody who's going to be embraced by the fans, but then who can also do it at the highest level. And so the process, I think, there's so many layers to it that really helped me, I think, get acclimated even quicker.
What was the most meaningful piece of advice, do you think, when talking to former players for basketball that they told you about, just advice on the hiring process, and who did that come from?
Gosh, Jimmy Jackson, right? Michael Redd. Just so many, guys like that. Chris Gent. That was fascinating. Chris Gent's an NBA assistant coach. And so talking to him during that stretch and hearing how he thought about basketball. Probably the most prevalent theme that I got was they wanted energy. They wanted somebody to embrace the program. They wanted somebody to embrace high expectations. And they wanted really somebody that understood Midwest recruiting and had Ohio ties. That kept just coming out in all those conversations. And they just felt that if you do all those things, that the scoreboard piece, the winning piece, will really take care of itself. And so to me, it was more about leadership, culture, recruiting, Ohio ties that I just kept hearing. And every time we matched other candidates with Jake, it just became a no-brainer to go with Jake Diebler.
No, Jake wasn't the only big move you've made since getting here. When you took over, you let go of the softball coach and were tasked to hire a new softball coach and then also a baseball coach. Just what was that like? And then describe for me, how you came to those conclusions and what the whole process was.
Yeah, Gene and I worked out this plan, and I thought it was great. Where any long-term, Gene was the athletic director until June 30th. We were very clear about that. Other than hiring coaches, I really tried to stay. I didn't do an interview. You and I never met, right? Things like that. I tried to really stay off the grid publicly, but I had to make those coaching hires. So of course you had to do public engagements around those activities. But any long-term decision, we had an agreement that I would make those long-term decisions. And so I think it was, again, another validation of the brand of Ohio State. Again, people may not think softball's big on the radar here at Ohio State. We packed our softball field just about every weekend. So there's a lot of energy around softball. Girls softball in the state of Ohio is only getting better. Recruiting in this area is only getting better around softball. Same thing with baseball. There's a ton of players from Ohio that leave and go to the SEC or the ACC or the Big 12. And so both those processes, I think, validated that you can actually win in those sports here if we have the right plan, the right demeanor, the right approach. We have to allocate scholarships maybe a little bit differently, things like that. But we needed somebody who would embrace this location, embrace the geography, embrace the weather. It's hard to play games outside in February and early March, right? But having somebody who understood that and wasn't afraid of that. Those are all the components that led to hiring Coach Kumar and Coach Hare in softball and baseball. Very similar demeanor, very similar chemistry to, I think, what Jake Diebler brings to the table. Young, aggressive, assertive, confident in their approach. And then both of those coaches were sitting head coaches. So again, that showed that Ohio State is always going to be able to attract sitting head coaches. And so that process was a lot of fun. It was not necessarily was not on my my checklist when I got the job, because I was focused on learning the place and understanding culture. But we had to make those hires because they had long-term impact.
And when you got here, I know the budget was in the red and dire, but since then there's been a shift and it's substantially better. Could you explain that shift?
Well, you really have to go back to FY23, 2022-23 budget year. There was a huge surplus. FY24 budget year covers the fall of 23 and the rest of 2024. There was only 6 home football games in the fall of 23. When that happened, Gene and his team had mapped out, we will have a deficit budget in 2023. We just will, because you can only have 6 home football games. And that, the way the Big Ten schedule was rotated, the way non-conference scheduling was already set, it was an anomaly. We will always have 7 home games as a minimum. But when you only have 6, they knew there was going to be a hole, but they were going to balance it out with the previous year's budget. Well, then you had buyouts. You had Coach Holtman buyout. You had a couple other buyouts. We brought on Chip Kelly. There's some transition costs that were not anticipated. So what we're doing is we're basically taking a 3-year look at this. We're balancing FY23, FY24, and FY25. And right now our FY25 budget, which is what we're in now, to your point that you made, is really, really positive. And so over time, over those 3 years, it all balances itself out. I knew that going in. First time I talked to President Carter, we talked about the budget challenge because of the 6 home football games. We didn't talk about Chris Holtman transition. We didn't know that was coming. But understanding that and knowing, as long as there's a plan and as long as we're transparent with leadership on this campus, it's not ideal to be in a budget deficit, but we knew that we had a runway to get out of it. And so we're in that right now. We're having a good year so far, and we need to continue that momentum through basketball ticket sales. Football ticket sales are way ahead of budget, which is a positive. We need to keep that going with basketball and our other sports, and we anticipate that happening.
Yeah. Speaking on Project 36, it's going to entail the tiering of sports, and I understand that the lower tier is going to become pay to play. They'll have 6 teams and won't have a variety of resources that they've had in the past, like academic resources. Now, I know you've said you aren't cutting sports, but a different economic model is just necessary. Just walk me through this. What does this mean, and how will the university change because of it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Noah, and it's something that we're, again, constantly dealing with. At the start of this, I said we were in, 4 or 5 different meetings, the last couple days, and so the way we've approached this is Ohio State athletics. We generate a healthy amount of revenue, but we also spend a healthy amount, right? And so how we spend our money is what we're really focusing on right now. What does that look like? Knowing that we're going to have a new expense of at least $21 or $22 million of revenue share that we'll be able to really distribute to the athletes. And so we're working on what sports, receive that revenue share. But we've got to offset that 22 million somewhere, either new revenue or a reduced expense allocation. So we're going through a whole process. We have not made any final decisions. There are some things out there, unfortunately, prematurely reported. We have not made any final decisions. But the way we look at it, and we have 36 sports, so thus we call it Project 36. We want to protect 36 sports. So we have principles: protect 36 sports, make sure we continue to focus on academics. We have a 96% graduation and placement rate of our athletes. Let's make sure we maintain that. Our GPA of all of our student athletes is over a 3.3. So focus on academics, focus on competitive success, but we may have to redefine expectations. What does that mean in this new landscape? Knowing we might be competing against programs who lessen their resources as well. So what does sort of competitiveness look like? We have to balance the budget. To the point you brought up, we don't want to go in a deficit. And then we need to modernize and lead in this new era with 36 sports, where maybe people look at us and say, oh, Ohio State did it this way, and that's a leadership position for us. So we're essentially going to have three buckets of financial aid for our athletes. We'll have a bucket that includes scholarships, traditional scholarships, plus revenue share. That'll be one category. We'll have a bucket that only includes scholarships, and we'll have a bucket where some sports do not receive any scholarships from athletics. They can pursue academic scholarships, they could pursue their own name, image, likeness opportunities that we can help facilitate, but essentially those are the three categories. And mapping out what sports go in what category is what we're working on now. There's lots of different twists and turns to this House case settlement, which is really providing the roadmap. We're getting different interpretations. I mentioned 21 or 22 million. We don't have the final number yet. And so the difficult part in this is we can't tell our coaches, okay, here's exactly your plan for volleyball or lacrosse or women's golf. And that's frustrating. The other part of this is we now have roster limits for each sport. Instead of having scholarship limits, we'll have roster limits. And so that we'll lose about 150 to 175 athletes. Right now we have 1,100. That will go down because of these roster limits. But we have to adhere to that. That's part of the court case. That's part of the settlement. So managing all of that, managing the budget, managing the allocation, managing the revenue share, there's a lot of work going into it because if we're going to have a sport, we want to be competitive. But what does that mean? What's the definition of that moving forward, and how should we view that here at Ohio State? And so those are all the things that we're putting on the table. We're also bringing, so this is a lot, Noah, so bear with me. We're also bringing what new revenue ideas can we bring to the table? What does all that look like? What are people okay with if we can be creative and we can add new things? I've said some things, I've answered some questions about different elements of what might be out there, and some people might bristle to that. And the answer is everything has to be under review right now because we have to pay for this new model. We have to do what's right while maintaining 36 sports. So everything's under review. We're still modeling. We hope we can have some kind of clarity in the next 30 to 45 days on what our model is and give our coaches some clarity as we map this out. So there's a lot of moving pieces to all of this. And the good thing, we have a great team. I've been really impressed with the pre-work that was done before I got here, the work that was done during the overlap with Gene, and then all the work that we've done since July 1st. And so our team is working on this constantly, and we'll have the right plan. We'll be on the right side of the equation. We're Ohio State. Whatever that equation is, we're going to be on the right side of it. And so we just want to get to that point. We want to get to that point where we can say, this is it. And we're getting closer.
Now, I did want to touch on the House versus NCAA settlement. And if it does pass, it would allow universities to be administrators of NIL deals. It started really with, hey, go make your money, to now, we're going to help facilitate these deals for you. From your perspective, just walk me through where NIL started, where it is today, and then where you think it's headed.
Wow. We could have two shows, Noah, on this. So, NIL has been going around for the last, 5 to 6 years, really started in California. There was a bill that was put together. The fascinating thing about that bill is it wasn't going to take effect until January 1st of 2023. Well, everybody raced to get something on the books state by state on July 1st, 2021. So now we're 3.5 years, into the new NIL era. And then when all this started back to 2021, the NCAA had put out some guidelines. We were going to have some guardrails. We were going to have all these parameters. Well, they backed off of that because they were worried about the legal landscape, which led to each state then creating their own NIL law. In Texas, I was a part of developing that law. Here in Ohio, Gene, his team, folks here on campus got an executive order passed through the governor's office. So every state, so that's created a patchwork of rules and maybe confusion. And then when all this started, what we all said was, hey, look, the institutions are going to take a hands-off approach. It's going to be between the athlete and the business. That was the way it started. Well, once everything kind of got a little muddier, we said, you know what, we need to support our athletes more. We can't let them just go down this pathway alone. And then you had the collective world come in into play where basically donors created entities, companies, where they were paying athletes directly, and it wasn't necessarily based on a market value between a company and a business to do a commercial or wear a clothing line or post some social media post. It really became collectives and athletes. So now what we've said is, look, we're going to have the house case, which will define the revenue share bucket. It will also help define what NIL can and should be through fair market value, through a system where you have to submit deals, and it has to be between a business and an athlete. We embrace that here. Columbus has over 30,000 companies. We have Fortune 500 companies. We have brand associations with people that are Buckeyes that either went to school here or have close affiliations or already have sponsorship deals. So we actually think we can really thrive in the NIL space. And to your point, we can actually be more involved in it. We can facilitate, we can arrange. We might even be able to negotiate in this new world. Those things are still being mapped out. But the point is, we can be more involved, and we think that creates unique advantages for us here in Columbus and around the state.
Now, when you got here, I know you said your goal is to leave this place better than where you found it. What does that look like to you, and what would make Ohio State be all that Ohio State deserves?
Yeah, I think it's easy to rush in. There's been people that have asked me, when are you going to lay out your plan, or when are you actually going to do something? Like we've been working a lot. There's a lot to this. Or when might you reorganize and things like that. And the way I've looked at it is, if you have a long-term approach, meaning leave it better than you found it, then you can, and it's in great play. It's a great place already. The culture is well defined. Excellence is already a standard. There's not a lot of things that you have to put out fires on right now. So I can really, one, we need to get the collegiate model solidified. So that's taking a lot of time. But leave it better than you found it mentality means let's do the right things for the institution for the right reasons. And if that takes a little more time, but we got it right, then we're going to do that. And so that's my mentality in all of this. We want to be best in class, and we will be. We want to get the right collegiate model for Ohio State. We want to be bold in this new modern era. We want to be able to use our voice effectively. We need to engage, revenue sources that maybe we haven't done before, while also understanding there's tradition and there's respect here, and we need to do it the right way. We operate this whole business advancement unit, and it's really a gateway to Columbus. We're not the Convention and Visitors Bureau for the city, but there's a lot that funnels through, Ohio State through Columbus. And so how do we enhance that? How do we partner better with the city? Those are the kind of things. How do we take that public trust feeling and elevate that and get more people to donate, get more people to buy merchandise, get more people to come to other games that maybe we're not marketing, effectively. The fan experience is a big deal. So all of those things kind of go into the big bucket of leave it better than you found it. And so whatever that looks like in 10, 15 years, others can decide. I'll never be the judge of my own legacy. No one can ever really do that. But I think if I have the right kind of patience and the right kind of demeanor, and we build relationships and we get to know people and we're connected, then we build equity for the long term, and that's what we're after every single day.